The first light of dawn stretched across the sprawling cityscape of Los Angeles, casting long golden shadows over the congested highways and bustling intersections. The relentless hum of engines filled the air, blending with the faint chirping of early morning birds. Inside a sleek black SUV, Sistine Stallone sat quietly, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on the fogged-up window. At 24, she was on the brink of what could be the most transformative moment of her life. Her destination was LAX International Airport, but her mind raced far ahead to New York City, where the opportunity of a lifetime awaited, a major film audition that could catapult her from obscurity to stardom. She wasn't a celebrity yet, though her last name carried a weight few could ignore. Being the daughter of Sylvester Stallone, a legend known worldwide for his iconic roles as Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, was both a privilege and a shadow. The Stallone name opened doors, but it also invited skepticism. People often whispered, questioning if she possessed genuine talent or if she was merely riding the coattails of her father's success. But today was different. Today, she was determined to prove she was more than a famous last name. The SUV rolled to a stop at the bustling departure terminal. With a deep breath, Sistine opened the door and stepped out, the cool morning breeze brushing against her face. Dressed in gray sweatpants, an oversized black hoodie, and white sneakers, she blended seamlessly into the crowd. No designer labels, no oversized sunglasses, no entourage. Just a young woman with a suitcase, a backpack, and a heart full of ambition. Despite her casual attire, there was an undeniable aura about her, a quiet confidence that hinted at the resilience inherited from her father. Her steps were steady, but beneath her composed exterior, a flutter of nerves stirred. This wasn't just another flight, it was a journey toward her dreams. The airport buzzed with its typical chaotic energy. Announcements echoed overhead, suitcases rolled noisily across polished floors, and travelers hurried past with determined strides. As Sistine navigated through the crowd, she passed families saying heartfelt goodbyes, business professionals engrossed in phone calls, and children tugging eagerly at their parents' hands. For them, it was an ordinary day. For her, it was pivotal. Approaching the check-in counter, she was greeted by Tina, an airport staff member whose disinterested demeanor was impossible to ignore. Tina glanced at Sistine's simple outfit, her eyes narrowing slightly with unspoken judgment. There was a distinct air of condescension in her posture, a silent question lingering in her gaze. Did this girl really belong in business class? Tina flipped through Sistine's passport lazily, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the counter. The tension was palpable. Finally, Tina's voice broke the silence, dripping with skepticism. Business class, are you sure? She asked, her tone implying doubt rather than seeking confirmation. Sistine felt a surge of irritation but maintained her composure. I'm sure, she replied calmly, her voice steady despite the sting of Tina's judgment. But Tina wasn't convinced. She scrutinized the ticket, holding it up to the light as if expecting to uncover a forgery. The minutes dragged on, each second amplifying Sistine's discomfort. Eventually, Tina processed the boarding pass but made no effort to mask her disdain. She dropped it onto the counter with a dismissive flick, avoiding eye contact. Gate C-22. Have a safe flight, she muttered flatly. Sistine picked up the boarding pass, her fingers tightening around the edges. A part of her wanted to respond, to call out the unnecessary rudeness, but she refrained. She couldn't afford to let this moment derail her focus. With a deep breath, she walked away, feeling the lingering weight of Tina's judgmental gaze. But the real ordeal was just beginning. As she approached the security checkpoint, the unease from the check-in counter refused to fade. She placed her belongings on the conveyor belt, removed her hoodie, and stepped through the metal detector. The routine was familiar, almost mechanical. But then, a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise. You there, step aside. Sistine froze, her heart racing. A tall TSA officer stood with an authoritative stance, his eyes filled with unwarranted suspicion. Is there a problem? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Random check, he replied curtly, though his demeanor suggested otherwise. No one else around her was being singled out. Another officer joined in, both scrutinizing her as if expecting to uncover something nefarious. They patted down her belongings with unnecessary thoroughness, their actions more accusatory than procedural. Passers-by began to glance in her direction, curiosity and judgment flickering in their eyes. Sini felt a mix of humiliation and fury bubbling beneath her calm exterior. She had done nothing to warrant this treatment, yet here she was, being treated like a suspect. She clenched her fists, her mind racing with thoughts of how easily people judged based on appearances. Just as the situation seemed to escalate, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Heads turned, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Stepping through the security barrier with an unmistakable presence was none other than Sylvester Stallone. His imposing figure, clad in a simple yet sharp ensemble, commanded attention without effort. His eyes locked onto his daughter, immediately sensing her distress. He approached with deliberate strides, his expression a mix of concern and controlled anger. The TSA officers visibly stiffened as recognition dawned on their faces. Is there a problem here? Sylvester's voice was calm but carried an undeniable edge. The officers fumbled for words, their authoritative facade crumbling. Just a routine check, sir, one mumbled, clearly intimidated. Routine, huh? Funny how she's the only one being checked so thoroughly, Sylvester replied, his gaze piercing. His mere presence shifted the power dynamic instantly. Without another word, the officers backed off, mumbling half-hearted apologies. Sylvester placed a reassuring hand on Sini's shoulder, his protective instincts evident. She met his eyes, finding comfort in his silent support. They walked toward the gate together, the earlier tension slowly dissipating. But the lesson lingered, a harsh reminder of how quickly people judged, how easily they wielded power without accountability. Sini blinked, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her backpack as she complied, unzipping it slowly under the sterile glow of the airport's fluorescent lights. The TSA officers wasted no time, their hands rummaging through her belongings with an indifference that bordered on disdain. Her sneakers were yanked out, tossed aside without a glance. Her makeup bag landed carelessly on the cold inspection table, its contents slightly spilling. The notebook that held her carefully written script was flung with such disregard that the pages fanned out like fragile wings, exposing her private thoughts to the indifferent crowd. Frustration simmered beneath her composed exterior, a heat rising with each careless movement. She clenched the bag's strap tighter, her knuckles whitening, her eyes sharp as she locked onto the TSA officer leading the search. She wanted an explanation, a reason beyond the unspoken prejudices etched into their smug expressions. But they never paused, never acknowledged her silent question. Their faces were masks of apathy, perhaps savoring the small power granted by their uniforms. One of them picked up her script, flipping through it lazily before letting out a short, derisive laugh. What's this? Trying to be famous? His words, seemingly casual, dripped with mockery. Sini inhaled deeply, anchoring herself against the urge to respond. She'd heard that tone before, the condescension disguised as idle curiosity. She knew this type. People who thrived on diminishing others to inflate their fragile authority. But it still stung, especially as she felt the weight of curious stares from strangers, their sympathy tinged with discomfort. They found nothing suspicious, nothing out of the ordinary, yet dragged the process as if her guilt was inevitable, hidden somewhere they just hadn't uncovered yet. Minutes crawled by. 5, 10, 15, until they finally deemed her belongings safe. Her script was tossed back into her bag without care, crumpling slightly at the edges. Next time, get here earlier, one officer muttered with a smug grin, as though this ordeal had been her fault, a punishment she deserved without cause. Sini zipped her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder with mechanical precision, her jaw set tight. She walked away, each step heavy with unspoken words. But the weight in her chest lingered, a quiet ache fueled by the knowledge that she wasn't the first to endure this and certainly wouldn't be the last. What she didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. As she made her way through the terminal, her irritation morphed into a fragile layer of resolve. She reminded herself that she had cleared security, that the worst was over. All she needed to do was reach gate C-22, board her flight, and focus on the audition ahead. But as she approached the gate, an uneasy sensation prickled at the edges of her awareness. A small cluster of airline staff stood near the check-in counter, their heads bowed in hushed conversation. Their glances flickered toward her briefly before shifting away, too quickly to be casual. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't someone easily unsettled by looks, but something was off. A man in a crisp suit broke from the group, his stride confident, his expression unreadable. The name tag on his chest read, Charles, supervisor. He stopped directly in front of her, blocking her path with deliberate precision. May I see your ticket again? His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of authority sharpened by impatience. Sini frowned slightly, caught off guard. Is there a problem? She asked, keeping her voice even despite the growing tension knotting in her stomach. Charles tilted his head slightly, his gaze narrowing. Our system flagged your ticket as potentially invalid. The words fell with a cold finality that sent a chill through her. I already checked in, she replied, pulling out her phone to show her boarding pass. We need to verify it again, he insisted, his tone unchanging, but his eyes held something sharper, a skepticism that went beyond routine protocol. Who purchased this ticket? He asked pointedly. Sini hesitated for a fraction of a second. She hated moments like this, where her identity was tethered to someone else's legacy. But there was no avoiding it now. My father, she replied, her jaw tightening slightly. Sylvester Stallone. For a brief moment, something flickered across Charles's face, an arch of the eyebrow, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then came the smirk, thin and dismissive. Oh, so you're Rocky's daughter, he said, glancing back at his colleagues with an exaggerated chuckle. Isn't that something? Sini felt the heat rise to her face, not from embarrassment but from a simmering fury. He didn't believe her. Or worse, he did but enjoyed pretending he didn't. This wasn't about security anymore. It was about control, about reducing her to a joke in front of an audience. We need to verify the payment details, he said, his tone laced with mock concern. I have the confirmation email right here, she snapped, holding up her phone. We'll need more than that, he replied smoothly, as if her frustration was just part of the entertainment. Her grip tightened around her phone. If you can't verify it, check your system. I have a valid ticket. But Charles shrugged, unaffected. If we can't verify the purchase, we'll have to cancel your ticket. The words hit her like a slap. She stood there, her heart pounding, as reality sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. No evidence, no cause, just an excuse to exercise power. I haven't done anything wrong, she said, her voice low but trembling with restrained anger. I passed security. I have a valid ticket. What more do you need? Charles tilted his head, feigning consideration before turning to a staff member nearby. Pull her aside. We need to conduct a deeper investigation. Two employees stepped forward, their faces neutral but their posture rigid. One reached for a radio, the other motioned for her to follow. Sini's world felt surreal. She wasn't causing trouble, wasn't breaking any rules. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. Around her, passengers watched, their whispers a soft, growing hum. She felt exposed, reduced to a spectacle. The humiliation burned hotter than her anger. I have the confirmation email, she repeated, her voice sharper now, tinged with desperation. Charles didn't even glance at her screen. We need more than that, he said again, like a mantra meant to dismiss her existence. You have no legitimate reason to do this, she protested, her voice rising slightly. Our system flagged your ticket, he replied with a shrug. If you want to file a complaint, you can do so through customer support. The words were louder this time, designed for the audience gathering around. Planting seeds of doubt, painting her as the problem. But this flight is not for you, he added, sealing her fate with an air of smug finality. Two staff members closed in from either side, their hands light but firm as they gestured for her to move. She stood frozen, disbelief and rage battling inside her. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice shaking. I did nothing wrong. But it didn't matter. Her words were invisible, like she was invisible. A person erased by the assumptions of those who held the power. The grip on her backpack tightened, the fury boiling beneath her calm exterior as she stepped forward, each movement a testament to the indignity she felt. The fluorescent lights of the bustling airport cast sharp reflections on the polished floors, turning her distorted image into an unwelcome metaphor of her fractured pride. The crowd around her buzzed with whispers, their murmurs a painful reminder of the spectacle she had become. Some faces showed fleeting sympathy, but most were passive observers, detached from the humiliation unraveling before them, as if human dignity was nothing more than transient entertainment in the monotony of travel. Every step she took felt like an attack on her pride. She wasn't a fraud, not a troublemaker, She was someone trying to claim her rightful place on a flight she legally booked, yet she was being treated like she didn't belong. The echoes of her footsteps mingled with the sterile airport announcements, each syllable a mockery of order and organization that had failed her so spectacularly. Her chest burned with the weight of unspoken words, her heart pounding in defiance against the injustice she couldn't yet articulate. The security doors swung open with an almost dramatic finality, their mechanical hiss sounding like a verdict. She found herself pushed back into the public area, discarded like an inconvenience. The sting of public humiliation settled deep, her heart pounding against her chest, each beat a painful reminder of her helplessness. She stood there, swallowing the lump of rage in her throat, and pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling, not from fear but from the raw, electric aftermath of suppressed emotion. The call connected instantly. "Hey sweetheart, you at the gate?" Her father's familiar voice cracked the fragile dam holding back her emotions. His tone was casual, warm, wrapped in the assumption that everything was fine, which made it hurt even more. Her throat tightened, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "Dad," she managed, her voice catching briefly before she pushed through, her breath shallow. They kicked me out of the airport." Silence answered her. Not the empty kind, but the heavy, dangerous silence that preceded a storm. His response was low, controlled, yet held an undercurrent of simmering fury. "What?" She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "They won't let me board. They said my ticket isn't valid, but I have all the confirmations. They just escorted me out like I was nothing." A slow, controlled breath echoed from the other side. She knew that breath well. It was his way of keeping the anger contained. When he didn't yell, when he grew quiet, that was when people should be afraid. "Stay right there," he said, his voice a promise. "I'm coming." The line went dead, leaving her standing amidst indifferent faces. She took a shaky breath, her heart racing not just from humiliation but anticipation. She had never seen her father angry because of her. That was about to change. The screech of tires announced his arrival. A black SUV halted abruptly in front of the terminal. No grandeur, no dramatics, just urgency. The door flew open, and he stepped out with the intensity of a man walking into battle. His presence commanded attention, drawing every gaze, but he didn't notice. His eyes, sharp and filled with controlled fury, were locked on her. Sylvester Stallone wasn't just a name here. He was a force. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, phones raised to capture the unfolding drama, but none of that mattered. He moved with purpose, his gaze softening only slightly as he reached her, his hand instinctively resting on her shoulder, grounding her. "Are you okay?" His voice, deep and steady, carried more weight than any shout could. She nodded, swallowing her pride. "They said my ticket was suspicious. They didn't check, didn't verify anything. They just wanted me gone." His jaw clenched, and then his gaze shifted, sweeping over the airport staff like a predator scanning for prey. The color drained from faces as they recognized him. The supervisor, Charles, who had been smug moments ago, looked like he wanted to disappear. Stallone stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Does anyone here want to explain why my daughter was thrown out of the airport?" Silence. Then Charles attempted to regain his composure, stepping forward with forced professionalism. "Mr. Stallone, I can explain." "I don't want an explanation," Stallone interrupted, his tone icy. "I want a legitimate reason. Was it your system or was it you?" Charles stammered, trying to find footing. "Her ticket was flagged as suspicious. We were following protocol." Stallone's laugh was soft, humorless. "Flagged as suspicious, and you didn't verify. You didn't call the contact number. You just threw her out." Charles floundered. "We have the right to deny service." "Deny service or humiliate someone." Stallone shot back, stepping closer. "You didn't follow protocol. You didn't do anything except decide she didn't belong." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Charles turned to an employee. "Reissue her ticket. Now." But Stallone wasn't done. "And apologize." Charles, pale and sweating, faced her. "Miss Stallone, I sincerely apologize." She held his gaze, then nodded slowly. "Next time, don't judge someone by how they look." The crowd was silent now, the balance of power irrevocably shifted. Charles's authority crumbled under the weight of his own prejudice, exposed not by a celebrity, but by a father who refused to let his daughter be diminished. As they walked back towards the terminal, her father's arm resting protectively around her shoulders, she felt the sting of humiliation slowly dissolve, replaced by a fierce sense of belonging. Not because of who her father was, but because she had stood her ground, and he had stood with her. Everything Charles thought he controlled was unraveling faster than he could process. Sylvester Stallone stood in front of him, his gaze dark, piercing, razor-sharp like a blade poised to strike. Charles felt as if the ground beneath him had given way, leaving him suspended in a void of irreversible mistakes. The murmurs grew louder, passengers whipping out their phones to record the unfolding spectacle. Screens glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights, capturing every humiliating second, but Stallone paid no mind. His focus was unyielding, zeroed in on the man who had dared cross a line that should have never been approached. Mr. Stallone, we were just following protocol, Charles managed to stammer, his voice betraying the professional facade he tried so desperately to maintain. It cracked, thin and weightless, dissipating into the thick tension that cloaked the room. Stallone's eyebrow arched, an expressionless gesture laced with silent fury, his stare slicing through Charles's fragile composure. Oh yeah, Stallone's voice was low, deadly calm. Your protocol includes insulting passengers, accusing them of fraud without any proof. Silence engulfed the room, suffocating and absolute. Charles swallowed hard, his throat dry like sandpaper, yet no words dared escape his lips. The staff flanking him were statues, paralyzed by the crushing weight of Stallone's presence. No one intervened. They knew this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. Stallone advanced, each step deliberate, an invisible force emanating from his towering frame. Charles instinctively stepped back, his confidence dissolving with every retreat. She told you she was my daughter. Stallone's words were measured, each syllable heavy with restrained anger, and you laughed in her face. His voice wasn't loud, yet it thundered through the terminal, crashing against the brittle walls of Charles's authority. Employees flinched, some averting their gaze as if eye contact alone could tether them to this sinking ship. But Charles had nowhere to hide. His fortress of power had crumbled, leaving him exposed, vulnerable. Sistine stood beside her father, the warmth of his presence a shield against the humiliation she had endured. But this wasn't about seeking refuge. She wasn't just Stallone's daughter, she was her own person, and she needed to reclaim her voice. Drawing a steadying breath, she spoke, her tone calm but laced with undeniable strength. They canceled my ticket, confiscated it, and escorted me out like I was a criminal. Stallone's jaw clenched, the muscles tightening with barely restrained rage. His eyes never left Charles, whose face was rapidly losing color, the gravity of his mistake sinking in with brutal clarity. You have power, Stallone continued, his voice softer now. But more dangerous than ever, but you used it to humiliate my daughter. Let me show you what real power looks like. The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. Charles's facade cracked completely. His skin turned ashen, sweat gathering at his temples. He could hear the whispers, feel the accusing eyes of the crowd, the recording phones capturing his downfall. He had felt invincible moments ago, wielding authority with careless arrogance. Now, he was a man drowning in the consequences of his own decisions. A female employee whispered urgently beside him, her voice trembling. Sir, we're being recorded. I know, Charles hissed through clenched teeth, his eyes darting nervously. If this gets out, we could lose our jobs. That's Sylvester Stallone. He could ruin us. Her words were a knife to his already battered ego. The illusion of control shattered, replaced by the cold, hard truth. He was nothing more than a pawn in a game far beyond his league. Taking a shaky breath, Charles tried to salvage what little dignity remained. Mr. Stallone, we deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. We will immediately reinstate Miss Stallone's ticket and ensure she boards her flight without any further issues. His words were hollow, a fragile attempt at damage control. But Stallone wasn't placated. He folded his arms, his stare unrelenting, a silent judgment that spoke volumes. I don't need a ticket, Stallone said, his voice a quiet storm. I need an apology. A real apology. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Charles felt it pressing down, suffocating. There was no escape. He turned to Sistine, his face flushed with humiliation. Miss Stallone, I sincerely apologize for doubting you. We were wrong. Sistine met his gaze, searching for sincerity she knew wasn't there. But this wasn't just for her. It was for every person who had faced the same indignity without the shield of fame. She nodded slightly. I accept your apology. But next time, don't judge someone just by how they look. Charles lowered his head, the final blow to his crumbling pride. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Just when it seemed the ordeal had reached its climax, hurried footsteps echoed through the terminal. A senior airline manager arrived, his face pale, anxiety etched into every line. He rushed toward Stallone, bowing slightly, his voice trembling with desperation. Mr. Stallone, we deeply apologize for your daughter's unpleasant experience. This was a serious misunderstanding, and we want to correct it immediately. We will upgrade her to first class. Stallone's expression remained unreadable, his silence more damning than any outburst. The same people who had dismissed his daughter minutes ago were now falling over themselves to make amends. It was pathetic. Now you realize your mistake? He asked quietly, the question hanging in the air like an indictment. The manager fumbled, gesturing to his staff. Hurry, reissue the ticket immediately. Within moments, Sini's ticket was reprinted, now adorned with the words, first class. As if a seat upgrade could erase the humiliation they had inflicted. Two employees approached her, their previous arrogance replaced by forced politeness, treating her like royalty. But Sini felt no victory in their change of tone. It was a hollow gesture, a reminder that without her father's fame, she would have remained invisible. She accepted the ticket, her heart heavy with the bitter truth. The lesson lingered, etched deeper than any apology could reach. The injustice had been acknowledged, but not because it was wrong, because it was public. The terminal, once bustling with indifferent travelers, was now filled with silent witnesses to a harsh reality. Stallone turned to his daughter, his eyes softening slightly. You okay? He asked quietly. Sini nodded, though her heart felt heavy. Yeah, I am now. But deep down, she knew the wound was more than just bruised pride. It was a scar, a reminder that respect often came with conditions. The echoes of the airport confrontation still reverberated in Sini's mind, refusing to fade as easily as the bustling crowd around her. The sharp words, the humiliation, and the righteous anger had etched themselves deep into her consciousness. As they reached the boarding gate, Stallone stopped, placing a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder. You okay? He asked gently, his rugged face softening with concern. Sini took a deep breath, feeling the tightness in her chest slowly dissipate. Better now, Dad, she replied, her voice steady but carrying the weight of recent events. Stallone looked at his daughter, a flicker of pride glinting in his eyes. I'm really proud of you for not letting this break you. You held your ground. That's what matters. Sini met his gaze, warmth spreading through her despite the ordeal she had just endured. She knew that without him, she might not have made it through, but more than anything, she now understood, justice doesn't always come on its own. Sometimes, it has to be fought for, tooth and nail, even when the odds are stacked against you. As she stepped toward the boarding gate, Sini turned back for one last glance at the airport. She saw Charles standing there, his shoulders tense, his face frozen in shock. The employees who had doubted her now bowed their heads in shame. Dozens of passengers still recorded, their phones capturing a story that would not be forgotten soon. She knew she would never forget today's events, but she also knew she was walking away with her head held high. That was the real victory. Stepping through the airplane door, the first-class ticket warm in her hand, Sini felt an odd mix of relief and defiance. The airline staff bowed slightly as she passed, their professionalism exaggerated to the point of artificiality. But she didn't care about them anymore. She had already seen their true nature, how they treated someone they thought was ordinary. She couldn't forget how they had laughed, doubted her, and thrown her out without a second thought. Now, realizing they had wronged the wrong person, they scrambled to make amends, eager to please. Would this have been resolved if she weren't Stallone's daughter? Would anyone have listened if she didn't have a powerful father? That question lingered, but she knew she couldn't let it consume her. As she walked down the first-class aisle, she felt the curious stares of other passengers. Some pretended not to look, but she caught their glances. Maybe some had witnessed everything, seen her escorted out like a fraud, and now saw her return with dignity. A middle-aged woman sitting near the aisle offered a small, encouraging smile. Sini responded with a slight nod, quickly finding her seat. She refused to be distracted by those looks. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes for a few seconds. It was over. She had fought for justice and refused to be stepped on. But now, something more important lay ahead, the audition. She wasn't flying to New York to argue with airline staff. She was going there to prove herself, to land the role, to step out of her father's shadow. No matter how difficult today had been, no matter the doubt and disrespect she faced, she had risen above it. The overhead announcement came on. Flight attendants demonstrated safety procedures. Sini leaned back, gazing out the window. The runway stretched ahead, airplanes parked side by side, their metallic bodies gleaming under the golden sunlight. As the aircraft trembled slightly and began to taxi, everything on the ground grew smaller, fading into the distance. She closed her eyes, feeling as if she was finally leaving behind all the negativity. She was no longer grounded. She was rising, flying toward her future. New York welcomed Sini with cold, sharp air, yet inside, she burned hotter than ever. Stepping off the plane at JFK, she carried a different mindset. No more anger, no more humiliation, no more feeling judged. Only one thought consumed her mind: the audition. This wasn't just another audition, this was the moment that could change her career forever. The city that never sleeps seemed to pulse with the same determination that coursed through her veins. Skyscrapers loomed overhead, their glass facades reflecting the dawn of new possibilities. As she navigated through the crowded streets, her heart raced with anticipation. Every traffic light, every crosswalk felt like a countdown to her destiny. 2 days later, Sini stood at the center of the audition stage, bright lights illuminating her face. In front of her sat the director, producer, and screenwriter. They didn't care who she was or where she came from. They wanted to see if she could become the character they were looking for. She took a deep breath, recalling every line, every nuance she had practiced. Then she let go. Every emotion bottled up over the past days, fury, shame, resilience, passion, poured into each word. She wasn't just acting. She was living the character. She was no longer Sylvester Stallone. She was exactly who the script demanded. The scene ended. Sini took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with the weight of emotions unleashed. Silence followed. She could hear her heartbeat pounding. Then, a single clap echoed through the room, then another, until the entire room erupted into thunderous applause. The director, who had silently observed, now smiled with satisfaction. He nodded, leaning forward, eyes filled with recognition. Brilliant, Sini. Just 3 words, yet they carried more weight than she had ever hoped for. It wasn't praise for Stallone's daughter, it was acknowledgement of Sini, the actress. She had done it. Night fell over New York, the city's golden lights twinkling amidst the steel and concrete jungle. Sini sat quietly in her hotel room, her body exhausted but her mind alert and filled with emotions. She stared at her phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard, embracing the moment before sending the message she had longed to send. The audition was amazing. We did it. Seconds later, her phone lit up with a reply from her father. I'm proud of you, princess. Bigger than cinema. Sini stared at those words, then leaned back, closing her eyes with a soft smile. Not fleeting, but born from deep, unshakable fulfillment. She had proven what she longed to prove. She refused to let anyone define her except herself. She recalled the doubtful stares at the check-in counter, the humiliation at security, the mocking words from Charles, the anger, helplessness, and pain. But she didn't let it break her. She stood up, fought back, proved her worth. Not because of her father, not because of fame, but because of herself. The battle was never just about a plane ticket or an audition. It was about something bigger. Looking out the hotel window, where New York continued to shine, she understood. If you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. If you let others define your worth, they will always undervalue you. And if you rely solely on someone else's name, you will never truly find yourself. She would never forget what happened at the airport, not because it made her angry, but because it taught her a lesson greater than cinema, greater than acting. It was a lesson about life itself. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you have the right to stand up and prove your worth. You deserve respect not because of someone else's name but because of who you are. Many people face injustice without powerful parents to defend them. Not everyone gets the chance to fight back. But Sini learned she would never stay silent. In the face of injustice, she would never let anyone look down on her so easily. And as the city lights flickered outside, she knew this was just the beginning of her story. Because true strength isn't in never falling, it's in rising every time you do.